Welcome to I Talk Tech, the special Platinum Edition, where I'm honored to be here with Danielle Supkis Cheek. I'm Jeannie Whitehouse. I'm the president of the ITA, and we're an association of technology professionals. We form a collaborative environment for members in technology to share their knowledge, to grow, and to learn. We believe that knowledge increases in value when it is shared. We do that. We foster that innovation and collaboration environment by holding 3 live member events. You're getting the background feed of me saying it to myself. All right, so sorry about that. And so we have 3 live events. We bring people together. Our members are very active in creating and delivering the content. And we're thrilled to have, as I said, Danielle here with us representing the top tier investment in our organization, which is through our technology partner program. Caseware, the organization that she represents, came in at the highest level of participation and is a platinum participant in what we do. So with that, I'm going to let Danielle tell you a little bit more about herself and Caseware. Danielle, thank you again for being here. It's an honor to have you, a thought leader in our industry, share your insights with our attendees.
So thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy having these conversations and kind of getting to ideate of what's coming next. I find it really fun to think about because it's such a measured approach, but you can still take a very innovative concept through measured approaches. So my background is actually pure assurance. I have worked at almost every size organization out there within the accounting profession, including owning my own firm for 5 years that I sold to a G400 firm. I've previously worked at an AI-only company doing data analytics and was their VP of Strategy and Innovation, Industry Relations, and I sit on a variety of various technical standard setting advisory committees. So right now I'm on the IESBA's Technology Experts Group, the Peaks IT, I was on IT Services, now it's the AI Task Force. I sit on the IFAC S&P AG as their deputy chair. I believe there's, did I say AI? ASAC AI Task Force. I think that's the last one of what I'm currently on. So lots of time spent really thinking about the foundational concepts of how this technology kind of fundamentally change or even not change the things in the profession. So really happy to be here. So I don't like talking about the rest of the second half of the slide. I find that you can read that if you care. I don't.
We want people to know all about your cool awards and recognition. So I am in a CPA firm. Yeah. So I'm in a CPA firm, and our firm uses Caseware. So for people that don't know, what is Caseware all about? What's Caseware's mission in the land of accounting?
It's to make users, like our firm users and corporate users, to work in a way they've never been able to. I think that really speaks to how we can have the efficiency and adoption of the execution of work and being able to work in a new way, but not ever losing the perspective and the viewpoint of the profession related to, the organization will want to remain in control and the concept of making sure that the users have space for their professional judgment and all those different things that come with the profession of deep understanding.
That's great. And can you tell us a little bit about Caseware's participation in the AI CPA initiative, known fondly as DAS? What does that mean? What is that?
Yeah. How is Caseware involved? So DAS is, So DAS is the dynamic audit solution. So we're proud to partner with AI CPA to implement an innovative methodology on the Caseware platform. So the concept is when you're in the world of working papers or just a document retention tool, there was an efficiency at the time. It's a little bit like laggard, if you will, in some cases, related to being compliant and housing your information where you need it to be and all the fundamental and foundational needs and being able to build financial statements and drive just general efficiencies at how you're able to work. Once you're able to move into cloud-based environments, you get another layer of efficiency related to adaptive checklists and being able to be responsive and more complex logic that can be applied. Well, where DAS really sits is taking that to the next level of taking a more innovative methodology approach where you can innovate through the concept of methodology and get even more efficiency and capability all still will improving your quality. And that, I'll get on a stump speech for a moment, because anybody that knows me knows I can't let this one go, is that quality and efficiency are so linked together. In our profession, efficiency is many times considered like a bad word, or scandalous or something like that, because it's almost equated to audit failure, or somehow it's you took a shortcut. It's not taking a shortcut to be efficient. It means it's being responsive to the situation at hand. So in my mind, risk-based auditing, and you'll notice I tend to have a lens of auditing because my background's auditing. But the risk-based audit concept is about being responsive to the risks for that particular engagement, client, whatever you may be doing. And so if you're being efficient, it means you're being responsive to the risks at hand. If you're over-testing in an area that has not warranted the over-testing because it's not that risky or whatever may be the circumstances, and if we're in a resource-constrained world, which I believe will always be in a resource-constrained world, even when we have new technology that creates more automation, there will always be a resource constraint in this world. It's never unrestrained. So in a resource constrained world, if you over audit and spend too much time in one area unwarranted, it means you're taking away from an area that probably is warranted. And so when you are being inefficient, it can actually have a negative impact to quality. And most people don't think about that. So if you're being expected to, the one that auditors always kind of have to over-test by the concern of the regulators, ends up being revenue. If you were over-testing revenue for the sake of over-testing, what else did you miss because you spent so many of your resources in revenue if it wasn't warranted? If it truly is the highest risk in all these different things, then absolutely, you test what's appropriate, but that means it's efficient, not that you've over-tested. So sorry that I can't get off that high horse about quality and efficiency interplay, but that's where the innovation and methodologies are going, is being able to more link the automations and the use of technology with the innovative mindset of how you can have adaptive methodologies and different ways of thinking about similar problems to execute in a way that will outperform the past. Not ever saying that the past was ever the wrong answer, but being able to get there even faster or better, or maybe whatever.
So the automation. So the automation is there to help us identify where we can most effectively apply the skills that we have. And to me, it's effectiveness, not efficiency. It's one of the things that Ed Kless and Ron Baker.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, effectiveness is really the goal. I mean, we can do the wrong things faster in an efficient way, but it still makes no sense. And that's what you're all about, is finding the right things to invest our time and energy.
Yeah, it's the intersection of the two concepts. Yep.
What happened? Just went away. All right. I'm going to change that to that. Yeah, it looks like the internet's doing something weird. So, all right. So, we're just technology folk operating in a technology environment, and we don't have control over the internet either. All right. So let's talk about, and this is one of your particular areas of focus and passion, I think, Danielle. What does ethical use of technology mean?
Ooh, it's a really broad question. To me, it's about an awareness and a nature of being cognizant of what you're doing and aware of your risk profile. If you look at the principles and the standards and regulations, whatever you may be subject to in the profession, most standards are being written in a mostly principle-based way these days. And they're really, most of them are performance standards, and there's a way of like, okay, this is how I've historically accomplished it. I think the concept of technology is going to change how do we execute, but it doesn't actually change the fundamental underpinnings of what we're working towards. So in an audit, we'd be working towards reasonable assurance. In a lesser engagement, it'd be something else, or something similar concept, depending on what you're doing. So I think the concept is, how do you appropriately leverage technology in a manner for which you're staying true to the underlying, not just the letter, but also the intent of what the profession really is about. I see a lot of organizations make statements related to the standards prohibit it because it's not specifically written in. I don't subscribe to that concept. I actually am of the opinion that a principle-based standard will fundamentally should fit most technology issues through, because it's written for an evergreen concept. And there may be some corner cases and refinements that need to be fixed, but the underlying principles should work. And then there's an extra element where understanding what risk profile have you changed, when you've changed the how do you execute, and how does that change the parameters, the risk profile, the considerations. To me, that starts becoming the kind of ethical piece of it, because that's where we start talking about in the profession, not subordinating our judgment to others, and the kind of complexities around independence and the use of technology. There's just so many areas that technology changes how you have to think about an issue, but it doesn't change the underlying foundational need to with upstand and protect our profession, because at the end of the day, the accounting profession, and particularly audit, because again, I say I'm biased toward audit, ends up being the foundation for capital markets and that trust element in capital markets. So if we're not considering and being really thoughtful on how we execute, things can come off the rails. But the pendulum can swing farther the other way, where people say like, no, I can't use it because it's not specifically permitted. But I think that's an over extreme viewpoint. There's somewhere in the middle ground. So to me, the ethical use of technology is how do you navigate that middle ground where you're still upholding the foundations of our profession, but still being able to think creatively and figure out how you're going to execute in a way that you've never been able to work for in the before. And I'm going to use your effectiveness concept. And let's pretend effectiveness is actually the quality plus efficiency equals effectiveness kind of concept. If you are not embracing concepts of how can I appropriately use technology in my work, and if I'm of the opinion, so I'm not going to pass judgment on anybody that doesn't share the opinion of mine, but if you're working inefficiently, you could have a negative quality impact. There is an element where thinking about how to execute the same end post, the same goal, not changing the end post, but how do I navigate in a way for which I can maintain the quality of what I need to do. So to me, it's all interconnected, and I hopefully did a good job explaining. It's a really complicated intersection that runs the risk of actually saying something accidentally negative about the extant approach, whereas the extant approach has worked for many years, and people will feel like because it's worked for many years, it's not broken, I should continue. And I do believe that in some cases you can, but there are other cases where the data volumes and the complexity of what is coming to, let's just pretend auditors again, because I carry a heavy bias toward auditors. What is coming next, those old extant approaches may not scale appropriately to be able to get to the same end post. So it's not ever one silver bullet. It's going to be a mix of what levers do you pull. And that's, to me, the ethical use of technology.
So
long-winded, sorry. You know me. I tend to be a little long-winded.
That's great. You have passion and you have deep expertise. So make it more understandable for dummies like me when it comes to this topic. So what kind of things are you worrying about? Because I don't even know enough to be afraid about the lack of ethical. What kind of things? Where are you seeing opportunities for this to be a problem? Is it with data management, or is it with where are we in danger of doing something that's not?
Let me start with an easy example, and then let me go to an extreme example, because I think that will help provide the bookends of the space here. So let's pretend we want to use a large language model, such as ChatGPT, Ada, Claude, whatever may be the case, a large language model to do a first draft of some kind of complex work paper, like a memo or something like that on revenue recognition issues. Just pick something out of the air. Using a large language model to prepare the first draft of that memo, probably a really solid use case. We have processes to have human oversight and review. We need what is on the AI side called human in the loop. So you have that human review. Yes, we worry about hallucinations, but we already have a review process in place. And I will get feedback that says that is not permissible. Why is it not permissible? And usually the reason, or some derivation of the reason, is that because I did not understand the processing for which the prompt was transformed behind the scenes, air quote, black box, into the output. Okay, that's a fair concern. It is very complicated in that black box. But, well, one, in the international ethics space is specifically permissible to rely upon an output by evaluating the output alone. It's one of the approaches. But if you think about let's liken it back to a human experience that is not related to technology. If I had a first year staff write a memo, I work on the inputs to that staff. I make sure I know what education they have. I make sure they pass a CPA exam or studying for a CPA exam, whatever. I work on their continuing education. I provide inputs to that staff to try to make sure I have a high quality output. I then get an output of the staff, of that first draft of the memo, and I spend some time reviewing it through my senior partner, like senior manager and upward review. I do not wheel that staff into an MRI machine and watch all the neurons and synapses in their brain firing on how do they write that memo. Their brain is a black box to me as running the CPA firm. I truly don't know what's happening in their brain, but I've done a lot of work on their inputs, and I do a lot of heavy review on the outputs. How is the use of a large language model, assuming you haven't, done anything wrong with confidential information, but let's just bookend that we've appropriately dealt with confidential information. We haven't leaked confidential information anywhere. But how is that any different? We did not have full insights into that human brain, but we did control the inputs as best we could, but we have a heavy human review on the outputs.
Yeah.
There's an analogy there that works, and I don't see how that one is controversial of a thing. So that's the simplistic one. Let's go
I have a question
to a more complex example. Oh yeah, please.
But hang on.
Yeah.
So I don't have control over the input of that large language model, do I? I don't have control over the input side. You told me I had control over half. Do we have control over the inputs on the large language models?
You can actually. So to the extent that so let's extend the analogy. For the staff, we do not control all of their life inputs in the first place that shape their opinion. Okay, so we haven't controlled everything. We didn't control their childhood. We didn't control their grade school years and their education. We controlled their higher education certificate or degrees, any certificates, continuing education, CPA exam. Okay, so we've only let's call it like 5 or 10% of the inputs of that staff, right?
Yeah.
Going back to the large language model, the main input to get a high quality response is actually your prompt. A well-crafted prompt is the new skill for good question. Asking good questions is writing good prompts. A well-crafted prompt can overcome a lot of deficiencies in other cases. And I do teach some prompt writing courses.
I'm just going to ask.
We're working on one. People do not spend enough time explaining what appearance do they want the output to have. A well-crafted prompt can be like a mini thesis in itself, but it gets you to such a high caliber of a first draft. So one, we control the prompt. Okay. There's also systems that allow you to put in your own body of knowledge in retrieval augmentation. So many times you will be providing your own body of knowledge for which you say is authoritative. And if you tell your prompt to use that authoritative information, or you tell the system to use that authoritative information, you've controlled that. You can also control what use of information in the prompt. So if you say only use the, ASB standard on blah, 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 let AUC 315, something like that.
Yeah, a lot of that is happening right now.
Yeah, so I think we do have, most end users won't have control over temperature settings and some of these nuanced ones. And again, you always have the risk of hallucination. I think professional judgment, professional skepticism means that you should believe everything that you're looking at has a chance of being wrong. It could outright be wrong. That's the critical mindset of professional skepticism that they're trying to teach. So when people start talking about, what about hallucinations? Well, what if the staff is wrong? How many times have you had a staff be wrong on something? Just outright wrong. Yeah. The risk with LLMs is it's confidently wrong. That's a little bit tricky. but so that's why I think fact checking becomes so important. And professional skepticism actually makes our profession more well suited to leverage LLMs for first draft of long form text, because we are already training our professionals to have a skeptical eye everything that they think about. They should be catching mistakes in ways that other professions don't train their staff from day one to not believe what they're looking at. I mean, our profession is actually really well suited for this. So that's it. Does that help on the control of the inputs?
Yeah.
You're never going to be in full control of any situation.
That's right. Yeah, that helps a lot. That's good. So I want to talk more about your teaching. What are you teaching at right now? You have courses at a university, right? That you're
So
teaching.
I teach data analytics for the Rice MAP program. I've taught it for, I think it's 9 years now since the relaunch.
Wow.
When I am a Rice alum, and when I heard about the relaunch, I contacted the department head, the new department head, who's great, and met. And I was already teaching, and I was teaching business modeling for undergraduate entrepreneurship majors. And I said, look, please include a data analytics class in your curriculum. Just as a professional that's in this space, I know there's only a handful of Rice CPAs right now that are of my age group, because of the nature of how, when Rice had a MAC program and then a long period where they didn't. And I said, look, it's become so important. Please, please, please include it. And I did a little pitch to the department and explained what I was talking about. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is totally the future. They totally got it from the onset. That program has had a data analytics class since the launch. And now it's actually a 3-course class that I still teach the capstone. So yeah, all things data analytics for the profession. And actually, when we did the mapping to the new CPA exam, and making sure we were covering the concepts that the professionals are expected to know to be, good, solid first-year staff, we had very little modifications that needed to be made, because at least my class in particular, the capstone, we teach in such a pragmatic, this is supposed to get you ready for the real world to be useful on day one, as close as you can be, in whatever firm or, narrow scope part of the profession that you go into.
Wow. You've got so many amazing skills and abilities and insights. We could talk for 6 or 7 hours. So you talked about data and analytics. So here's a topic. So at the Thought Leaders Gathering, which happens periodically, there was a huge issue raised around concern around, and one of the things you were saying is professional skepticism is the hallmark of what we as CPAs are trained to do and the way we're supposed to think. But we've gotten slack, I think, in using our skepticism and thinking about potential negative impacts of some of the things we do, like just sticking all of our data on the cloud, including all the attached documents and all of that, and expecting the vendor to be securing that data so that it's not used outside of its intended use. We're not looking at the agreements that say what that vendor's allowed to do. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing, things like vendors selling our customers that we put on their software because of the data they have about what that customer needs. So where does the ethical use of customer data, and what do we need to be concerned about going forward? Because we've got all our data now stuck in places that we don't really know what's happening with it. And we want you as a vendor, we want Caseware to take the stuff that we're doing and give us insights from it. But we don't want you doing other things like, selling some of that data to somebody we don't have any knowledge of.
It's such a great question. So I think maybe we're different than some of the other vendors that maybe not be as deeply rooted in the accounting profession space. We take a very narrow viewpoint of the world because of the concentration of our customer base, obviously. When I talk a lot about just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think people understand the value of data and how rich it is and how powerful that can be. But that doesn't fit for the underlying ethical principles of our relation, or I say our because I'm an auditor myself, the underlying relationships and ethical expectations. I do think it does create the opportunity to think creatively about how to solve a problem, because one of the things that people don't think about is that, yes, it's a wealth of data, but they don't even understand the bias in that data. And so if you sit there and try to take an overly, I'm going to use this data for somewhat mining that would actually be an unethical use of the data, it also has a ton of bias that actually doesn't necessarily give you a good result. Because I believe a general ledger is the byproduct of all decisions that have been made at a particular company. It's the end result breadcrumb trail of how the transactions are structured. So if I don't know much about a company and then I start trying to benchmark against an unknown data set, I have an unknown deep bias in that data set that makes it very hard to use in other applications. So to the other vendors that don't get a lot of questionnaires on this and get beat up on this on a regular basis, and I don't experience that. We have whole processes just to manage all the questionnaires that we have coming in, all the security questionnaires, all the FAQs. That must be happening to other vendors outside the profession, that they don't know how to deal with that, because we deal with that quite a bit. We have a whole group that works on that. So the piece that I then think it translates into is that within a firm, how do you use the data to expand your own insights? I think the cross firm stuff, I don't see any firm of a material nature really wanting to ever do that. Putting their clients' data into a very big repository that others could access, I think is a really strict firewall for most organizations that I talk to. There are mid-market and below firms that will not have enough of their own data to be able to obtain the value of the insights, that they'll be willing to put in more shared concepts as long as they have the appropriate safeguards. You can do interesting things if you have the effectively underlying client consent. Many clients will want the benefits of the insights that would then provide consent, but there are going to be so many clients and customers that it's outright impermissible. The data is so sensitive. When we start talking about public companies and trade secrets and government agencies, it becomes really sensitive data. It's not just financial ledger data. It is core operational data. When you go look at architectural and archaeological, that's hard to say. Archaeological digs, they get excited when they find old accounting records, because it's some of the most complete understanding that they have of a different thing. I saw a headline the other day that I've been meaning to go back and read about some kind of money laundering scheme or tax fraud that they found in some old, like, I don't want to say which country it was because I forgot what it was, but like Greco-Roman aged records. And I was just like, this is amazing. So going back to the role of data, there are appropriate ways to do it. And I'd say a lot of the committees that I'm on have talked deeply about what are those permissible ways. And really it comes down to client consent. The underlying client consent, do they want their data used in that way? I'd say a lot of organizations do put into their master engagement letters information about how we want to use your data. And depending on the jurisdiction you're in, there is even if you anonymize it, that's not good enough. Usually you have to look to the benchmarking interpretations or information about the use of data to find and analogize the right way. And so when you start to look at internal of your firm, and what is a firm is a little bit actually confusing because of how networks work. So what is defined as the firm when you're in a network? So let's just take whatever you happen to, as a listener, define as firm and say within firm. Then, okay, now we don't have the crossing of a firewall that should never exist. Once you have that, what is the data you're allowed to have access to? Then being able to figure out what kind of interpretations do you want from it. But most of the time, you do still have to respect a certain amount of staff permissions. So one of the things that we've been grappling with, and I've been interviewing a lot of customers about, is when we connect our data lake to our large language model work, that will be forthcoming at some point, because it's incredibly complex to get the permissions right. One, the permissions have to be respected. Permissions have to be respected. Those that just kind of take a really big viewpoint of the world don't necessarily understand the firms and how there are certain customers that are more restricted in their content than others. And they, I like to use the professional athlete example because that resonates with more people, but a lot of times it's the ultra high net worth individual, the government agency, the top secret XYZ company, the public company that you don't want additional risk of insider trading type risks. There's a lot of sensitive data. So you have to respect the permissions of that. When you respect the permissions of that, you then run the risk of inappropriate reliance on the response. If it's only based on 5 answers or 5 data points of something versus somebody else has access to 20 data points, that answer can be fundamentally different. So how do you make sure that the user has enough knowledge to be able to appropriately decide if they can rely, if they have enough information to drive it. I've thought a lot about this. We, of course, have our own individual view of how we're going to solve this that I may spare everybody. But most people don't think through that layer of, okay, now that I've safeguarded my data, I have it, keep it within my walls. I get my permission from my customers, but then there's that extra permissioning layer. That is the piece that becomes, while simplistic in theory, incredibly difficult to maintain and execute upon. And so I think you'll start to see more interesting applications in this space. And I think one of the most interesting things is going to be the use of data for quality monitoring. Most of the quality monitoring standards, SQMS and ISQM, have a concept of in-flight monitoring, where you're monitoring the work that's being done in more real time and being able to ensure that you're delivering a consistent, high quality product. Most of the major firms are focused on this area because there's such a scale to the organizations that you want to have quality monitoring indicators. When does a quality monitoring indicator cross the line into a new insight? There's some interesting ethical rules in the IASBA, International Ethics Standards, about the use of data for the benefit of the firm related to insights versus quality. So that line ends up becoming really tricky. I don't think most people would ever argue that using the data appropriately to manage quality management matters would be an inappropriate use of data, as long as it's not abused. And where is the line of that? I think those are going to be the nuanced questions that we will spend more time having internal arguments about, more so than the monetization of data. I think the monetization of data is going to be short-lived in the concept of the accounting space. I think the data remains very valuable, but you're not going to see people trying to sell the data the same way you'd have outside vendors coming into the profession. Those that are in the profession, those that are run by people that have deep knowledge, you're not going to even go there, because you know what our customer base is subject to on the accounting profession. I don't think there's going to be any appetite to change the standards in this regard. I think that concept of protecting data is going to remain fundamental, and I think you're going to start seeing even more things like GDPR like concepts around the world that continue to protect data. And I get that we don't have a ton of consumer data in a lot of our data sets, but you can have PII in a general ledger or other accounting data sets. It's surprisingly in there. And then if you layer on the EU AI Act and having an AI system that has PII in it for some reason, like that starts becoming more and more complex. So I think you're just going to have more and more complexity that, people are going to have to consistently ask their vendors, what are they doing the right things, getting third-party assurance. We recently announced that we obtained third-party evaluation to make sure our systems were safe. We're not retaining user prompts. We're not passing anything back into a model. Those kinds of things to ensure that there's additional safety and you're not biasing a system. So I think that's going to be the trend more so than anything. I've been rambling on for a while. I have a lot to say on this topic.
It's kind of the same dilemma in real life. We have to have better prompts, right? We need to know how to ask better questions of our vendors as people. The same design of the questions for a prompt for AI. Yep. We need to be thinking about these things, because we don't even have an awareness of the things that we don't know to ask. And we're not even thinking about some of these, and we're taking, I think, a lot for granted in many of these solutions that we're just all jumping onto, and that our customers, our clients, in many cases, are jumping onto without our input. So we're in this situation where their data is exposed.
I would suspect most of your listeners have thought about this deeply.
Yeah. I hope so. Okay.
Yeah, the customers one is an interesting point. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the customers one is an interesting one because it is their data. And so if a customer doesn't recognize the value of their own data or or care to safeguard it because they get more value out of the insights than they get in the protection of data. I believe, our profession should always be informing our customer or our clients of risk profiles that we see, reminding them of risks, but we cannot be the forcing function and being overly motherly about saying you shouldn't do this because we subscribe to a different layer of protection of data. We still have to protect our clients' data and customer data in that same manner, regardless if the customer doesn't value their own data the same way. We still have the burden, but if they're doing things that are a bit, let's go dicey, it doesn't absolve us of the protections that we have to have, but it also doesn't mean we have to force them into our point of view. Which puts, if you have anybody that are listeners from those in industry, puts those in industry sometimes in a weird conundrum of how to manage things when there are ethical principles for those that operate in industry on data and use of technology.
Yeah. Wow. There's
okay, now I can let you switch. Sorry.
Wow. Okay. It's all good information. Scary information, though. So how has Caseware's business changed, and how has sort of your perspective changed from role to role? You've been in sort of leading edge situations in all of the roles that you've held, which makes sense based on your incredible knowledge. But what have you seen change, and what do you think is coming? Well, we're going to talk about the future in a minute, but how has it changed so far up to this point? And I think it's evolved really quickly.
Yeah. So what's really interesting in my little viewpoint of the world, in my little world, when I go to accounting profession based meetings, conferences, events, I am the young one, like, aren't you the young buck? How are you even here? Kind of things many times. But then when I go to tech, I am old. I am deeply old and conservative and have really archaic views on things. But then again, going back to an accounting or an auditing based professional event, I am like crazy innovative, on the bleeding edge. And it is a weird intersection to navigate on a regular basis of being constantly told you're too young or you're too old. And and not just the age, but the mindset. So in the world of accounting, I have a deeply innovative mindset. But if you translate that to the tech world, it's actually barely early majority. It's probably laggard. And I think that may be a function of how our profession has historically been so historic looking. Our job is to make sure the past is reflected accurately. And a lot of work is being done to be making the CPA profession a bit more proactive and forward looking. That comes with a whole new host of responsibilities and complexities. But the foundations were very much historic looking, and our profession gets regulated, for those that are subject only to peer review, on a 3-year cycle. And so you don't have a driver that has a forcing function of change. If anything, you have a forcing function that says we have to be very measured, we have to be steady. There is no room to fail fast. You'll see that I get upset when I hear the term fail fast. Really get upset when I hear it. I said it, I'm upset at myself for even saying it, because you don't go for audit failures. Like, that's just not a term. The concept of constantly iterating and working quickly, fine. The concept of fail fast, bad word choice. So how does that change? How does that change what I've seen? My viewpoint is that AI has sped up the pace of adoption so quickly, and there's so many things that are happening so cool, so fast. Like I say it quite often that a quarter in AI is like a year in the rest of the world. It's almost like a doggy year concept. So when you have that pace of change happening so quickly, it makes you feel like you're constantly behind. But the profession has kind of had this, historical viewpoint and a measured approach where you can't be the bleeding edge, but how do you be innovative and forward looking in a creative way that you respect the safeguards and the parameters? I actually think it makes you a more creative in a positive way approach to solutions, because most accountants aren't doing tech for tech's sake. Tech is not just some cool bell and whistle. It needs to solve a problem. It changes how we execute something of an existing problem. I think the change that I've seen is the willingness to consider alternative approaches, viewpoints, and a more respect for the history, but recognizing that the history may not be the way forward. I think it's probably a really big pivotal moment in the profession where there's an acknowledgement that the historical way probably will not scale to keep up. And then the complexity becomes, when do I get in? How do I get in? How much? How little? What's the parameters? How do I navigate it? Now it's happening so fast that even if I'm well-intentioned, I can be accidentally like ill-placed and ill-suited because I don't know exactly what I don't need to know and how to pivot. And it changes so quickly, but you still have standards. And like RevRec took 9 years to get through. Like, that's a really long time. That's a long time to prepare. You get to read the exposure drafts. You get to read what's coming. You know years in advance what you're going to be hit with. And in the world of pretty much AI and tech, every quarter you feel almost a seismic shift and something amazing that has happened. I do believe we're probably in the trough of disillusionment stage of the use of Gen AI. I think it was oversold on what it could do. I'm constantly amazed at cool things that I could do, but it's coming out of the really cool parlor trick phase and having these theoretically huge hopes that come out of parlor tricks into, okay, we now have to reconcile, how do we actually execute this at scale and make it work? And I think we're really going to come in quickly to that plateau of productivity where people start to figure out, okay, where can I actually create value for my organization and make it so that I can keep up with whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish. So for me, that's what's changed. It's the willingness to accept what is the kind of changing landscape. And I'll add that accountants are used to a changing landscape. They're just not used to a changing landscape on this issue. Those that are in tax are used to, oh my gosh, change every year, so fast, so much uncertainty. The rules are changing, they're retroactive, you're having to plan, you don't know what to do. We as a profession are actually well suited for change. We just haven't had this part change, and we haven't exercised this change muscle.
We're used to changes in tactical details. We're not used to this kind of change in our environment. I think that's the shift. And not just in regulatory and political environment, but the acquisition of activity in our profession, the impact on staff, the inability to find, and all these other things combined, plus, the whole technology advancements around cloud and all that stuff that we've all addressed. So I think it's just the everything coming together at once is what's hard. And again, we thrive on stability, and you can't have but so much stability in an environment of constant chaos like that. And then you look at, in our area, and I'm in Napa Valley, just the impact of the weather on things, the fires and the droughts and the floods and the tornadoes that we just had in Northern California yesterday. For the first time, they had tornado warnings, which we've never seen out here. So all of that together, and I guess every generation can talk about those kinds of things, but I think it's the pace on top of the level of new stuff that we have to be informed about. It's crazy. Yeah. So what's your prediction? You get out your crystal ball.
But here's back to the weather. So So maybe I'm going to link what I wanted to say into my crystal ball for a moment. The weather comment. Weather is deeply weird right now, categorically. Yeah. But we've had deeply weird weather before, and how we risk manage that. Those organizations that can, weather derivatives. And so it's thinking about, how do you risk manage in a way of constant changing and uncertainty on what can you rely upon anymore? And I think that's the piece. To me, the pandemic shifted the concept of what can you rely upon as an expectation of the future. And I think there's going to be a lot of changing. It almost goes back to the good old SWOT analysis, but you're having to go in a really deep, like, what could those things be, and all those scenario plannings in much deeper and more crazy risk management way. It used to be that if you had somebody that was a risk manager that come up with these like crazy scenarios of like, how would we stress test a system? They were thought to be like, you've got a really weird mind. And now that all those things have probably happened, it's like, oh, you are a fortune teller. So I think what lies ahead for accountants is exciting, but a bit uncertain. And I don't think accountants have always had the permission to think a bit more futuristic. They've been so focused historically and making sure there's a level of precision in the historical. So how do we become more forward looking, and how can you give up as an accountant? How do you give up precision? Like, that is a really deeply complex concept. And when you start to look forward versus look historical, you can't predict the future. We just had a series of examples where we cannot predict the future. But how do you do and think about the scenario analysis, the fact patterns, the trends, and come up with things that have historically been in other professions that are more future looking just by the nature of what they do versus historic looking? How do you reconcile those things? And I really like looking to other professions for best practices of things that they've had to deal with and accomplish and think through. I find that deeply interesting. I like to go to this Rice Visualization Symposium that's cross-functional and cross-departmental. And surprisingly, at one point, I realized that the data from a astrophysicist was similarly conceptually problematic the same way accounting data was. And I was like, really? Oh, that's interesting. So the issues you're having on visualizations are the similar issues to accountants are. Maybe I should learn a little bit more about astrophysicists. I think there's lessons. I didn't hear you say.
I'm sure you will. You're going to go learn all about that, I'm sure. You probably start teaching. You'll be teaching classes next time we talk.
No, no, not at all. I like to see how it applies to accounting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So I think the crystal ball is, I don't know what the crystal ball is, but it's how do I position myself so that whatever happens, and I know it's going to change. The only constant is change concept. I know things are going to be totally different. I know it's going to be happening faster than I'm probably comfortable dealing with. So how do I make decisions now that position me the best for being adaptable in the future? So I kind of subscribe to a lot of the concepts related to agile project management methodologies, where you are sitting there and like, I need to make short-term decisions, but I need to have a long-term vision of where I'm trying to go and make decisions that pretty much just don't hamstring me for the future, but are on the right path. But I need to iterate on this. I need to test things out. I need to see what's going to work, figure out the one problem that I would not have anticipated ever. But once I do the first little test or pilot, I've recognized it.
And then you adapt.
You know, accountants have been so wanting to be so precise historically that they over engineer the solution to be so prescriptive or so this way or that way, that by the time they're done, the systems and the approaches have changed. And they didn't learn the lesson until the end. And then it takes a lot of rework. So I think the changing mindset is the piece that will be the most difficult for us. But I think it's the piece that will make it so that the change of the future ends up being just ordinary course. This is what we're used to. We're already used to change. It's just not in this muscle memory space of our foundational kind of core capabilities and execution steps versus a tactical, to your point, tactical standard or interpretation or reg, whatever may be the case.
I think that was one of the biggest blessings of the pandemic, was that we had to be comfortable with providing answers when we didn't have 100% knowledge. I mean, these regulations came out, the PPP loans and all that stuff. We had to tell our clients whether they should keep staff on hand or not without a full understanding of how these regs were going to be implemented and how the loans were going to happen and what the requirements were going to be. So we, for the first time, I think it really showed that. Yeah, go ahead. We had no choice but to make assumptions about what we thought.
I think we have a timing lag. So I was going to say, I think it really showed the value of getting into the mindset of those that do tax advisory work. Um, those that did tax advisory work were kind of advising the rest of us, and those that do advisory were advising the rest of us on how to have these conversations that you did not know in your scenario planning for the future unknown. So I think the skill set in that space is going to be very leverageable into other places on how to train people to, one, ask good questions about to understand the fact pattern and the situation, but then chart out the different scenario planning. And I think a lot of the role of the accounting professional will start looking like scenario planning and some modeling exercises. And I think that's where you're going to start to see some really cool use cases of AI, because you're going to be able to get more complex circumstances and scenarios that you then do multiple different things and start honing in on some understanding of the breadth of options that there could be. Like I almost see it as a hurricane weather tracking once. I went to a really good lecture on weather data tracking, by the way, and visualizations, like amazing. If you think of some of the world in like this hurricane paths and all the different models, and you see the spread of where those models are, yeah, you're going to have those scenarios where it does something totally weird. That is going to happen in life. But you see all those models, you see all those lines, and you're like, okay, I know this is the band of likelihood. And here's my extremes, here's my minimums, but I start getting comfort. If I'm in that band, I should probably start doing my hurricane planning. Yes, there'll be circumstances that it does some crazy veer left, go circle, hit Houston twice type thing. Sorry, I'm in Houston, so I think of hurricanes on a regular basis since we're on weather.
Yeah, I think that is, I think I absolutely agree with you. I think we are going to have to release some of our focus on accuracy in order to provide relevance and timely answers. We can't always be 100%
but be able
certain
to
on
be
anything.
able to quantify. And I think, but I think the real precision is going to be able to provide the precision on what we're giving up in precision and accuracy. Like, what is the incremental drop that we create to provide the forward-looking nature and the breadth of experience and that timeliness. I think there's going to be a trade-off point that as we're able to quantify that, and that's deeply hard to do, once we're in a position where we can conceptually quantify that concept, even if you can't numerically quantify it.
Yeah.
But I think that's where people are going to get comfortable, because you've quantified the risk of the lack of precision. And I'm not saying imprecise, I'm just saying like this minor step down in precision, because you can't predict the future.
Yeah. Well, when you figure out the AI solution for predicting the future, Danielle, please call us. We'll all buy it. With that,
sounds good. I'll work on it.
Yeah, I'm counting on you. If anybody can do it, it's you, Danielle. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing insights. Thank you, Caseware, for letting us take some of Danielle's valuable time away from her other jobs. And we appreciate the support that Caseware has for the ITA as an organization, allowing us to bring people together, to share ideas, and to learn from smart people like Danielle and others in our community. So with that, I thank you so much, Danielle. Have a great weekend. If people want to contact you, they should go to Caseware and reach out. I can find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
They can take your classes.
Find me on LinkedIn or support at Caseware, I believe they can get to me too. Yep.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And hang on for a minute after we close here.